Good evening. My name is Michael McCracken, or Mike for short. I'm an agriculture teacher at Citrus Ridge Civics Academy. Today, I've been assigned to talk about the principal ideas of self concept, social cognitive, and moral development. Now, when you think about these, they all deal with the psychology aspects and the stages of growth and development of an individual. When we start talking about these, we have um, an idea in the back of our mind what we actually perceive these to be. When I heard these, I was very excited because I was like, oh, I kind of understand these and I got them. But as we dig deeper, we think about all the different aspects that are out there, that we are aware of the simple terms. But as you get further into it, what do they truly mean? And I hope to dig into that a little bit here today. And there's a reason why I'm talking about digging a lot. Um, this past Tuesday, um, I'm an advisor in an FFA chapter, and we had a land judging contest. And as doing this contest, I had to divide up. I had 8 members down there, and I had 2 teams. And I'm going to use this as an example to help demonstrate the principles and the ideas of how students perceive themselves, the self concept, and how they deal in the social environment, and how they need to do the right thing, which is a moral obligation. And I'm trying to use it so not only do we have the terms, but we also have a clear understanding by the use of these students. So when we get into it, the whole idea of self concept, and like simply that is, how do you perceive yourself? Who am I? It's a simple question that we ask ourselves a lot. And if you were to sit down with an elementary student, the kid would come out and it would be very easy for him to just say, hey, I'm a student, I'm a friend, I'm part of something. And you get to a student when we're talking middle school, it comes up with a whole different aspect and they start to think about it in larger terms. And a lot of times it takes them a while to determine themselves. Who am I? And they question and they really get a blank stare in their face. And so I try to give them some hints. Are you a student? Are you this? Are you an athlete? And eventually they start getting a role, and then they start feeling better as themselves, and you get a raise of the arms, and you kind of get a feel, and they start smiling themselves because they start to realize of who they are and the value that they place on themselves. And when we're talking about this and we're thinking about these students evaluate themselves and what they perceive themselves, and really this is the most important thing. We got to try to keep them in a positive frame of mind, because a positive frame of mind, they're thinking that they're good for everything. They're good. They're having a positive response. They view themselves as a benefit to the class, and that's going to lead to them to having more success, more mastery of the subject, more mastery of the standards. Now, a lot of times we don't only think about what is currently going on. We talk about the past. Well, I was this person, or I hope to become this person. And I sat there in my class today at the end of the day, and when I was reviewing this, I kind of sat down and said to one of my students, I said, who are you? And he gave me a couple terms, and I sat there and I said, great. And he sat there for a few minutes, and I said, what do you want to become? And he says, well, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And I think it was easier for him to tell the future more than the here and the now. And the kids put a lot of pressure, especially in middle school. They have a lot of anxiety, if you were. They have a lot of self-esteem. They're going through a lot of changes, and with that, I always say the movement from elementary to middle is one of the most extreme, because elementary, every kid loves each other. When you start to get into middle school, you make the transition between classes, and then all of a sudden you're not always with your friends. You don't have the birthday parties. You don't have the celebrations that. And so it becomes more challenging. And then you start questioning, are these kids my friends? And it changes daily, which is a very real struggle for a middle school teacher. I can tell you that right now. Um, there's a gentleman named Carl Rogers, and he came up with this concept that he says everybody strives to reach this ideal level. And I thought about this for a second, and I asked myself, what is an ideal level? And I guess it depends on who you are and what you hope to become. I think everybody would sit there and say, I want to be rich, I want to be famous, or I want to be a movie star, I want to be this person. And that puts a lot of pressure on you, because at the end of the day, that ideal, if you don't reach it, does it mean that you're not going to be successful? And so really you got to think about it and try to keep it in perspective. How far can I reach? Can I still reach the goals? If you keep that higher order thinking, we keep pushing these students to the next level, they have that potential to keep going up, further up and up. Josh Turner said that there is two different types of self-concept. There is one that we self-perceived, how we view ourselves, and then there's one of social, and that's how we in an environment. How do we fit in? And really, it could be a school, it could be a celebration. Any way you look at it, if an environment, the most popular kid is not always positive about himself. He's not always self-assured. Social gathering for adults. They could be the talk of the town. They could be the one that everybody wants to gravitate towards, but deep down inside, they might have a low self-esteem and really not want to be that limelight, not wanting to be that person, but has been that person for so long, they really don't know how to change the role and just wish at some point that somebody would see them and help them and guide them. So, um, Rogers also brought up the point of three things, and I think this is how I'm going to conclude this portion of it. He talked about self-image and self-esteem and the idea of self. And self-image is how they view you have of yourself. Is it a positive one? Is it negative? And you sit there and you really think there is, well, this is positive and negative, and then you start to do the pros versus cons, and you really find out, is it, am I positive? Do I view myself in the positive? And a lot of these students nowadays, unfortunately, um, I just between the phone, modern technology, I didn't have all the Snapchat and all this stuff going on. And you say something on the phone over these little chats, and it might come across different than what they really perceive. And it's really become an issue as far as self confidence. When you get into self esteem, you talk about the value you place on yourself. And I try to talk about my experiences because I think this brings it to the light. And I have this girl in my class today that couple other classes, and today she started getting in trouble, and she's like, I didn't do anything wrong, because she tried to downplay it, and finally she got caught. And she's a really good student. She has a lot going for her. She's part of student government. She's part of my FFA, and she's been with me for several years. And she goes, I'm just not worth anything, so what does it matter if I don't show up for class? And I was like, why are you saying this? And she goes, well, at the house. And then she got further into it, and she just, the end result is that the parent involvement is just not there. And really, we can teach them, we can coach them, we can become friends to a certain degree to make sure that there is that relationship, that rapport between teacher and student. We need to make sure that we're not only hearing the correct answers on the test, but what are the correct answers in life, and are we doing right by these students? Um, she is one that is going to need a little bit of assistance. She's got to like start bringing her standards, her level back up, her self-esteem, and really just viewing herself as a positive, because she does have a lot going for her, and because of the home front and the negatives that are coming from there, it has just broke her down over the years, and that has become an issue. Um, your ideal self, what are you really worth, or where you really think you would like to be, or who you really wish you were? Now, we really wish we were the NBA player that were making millions. We really wish we were this. But is that the ideal self that we really could be? We got to put in context that realistic. Who do you really wish you were? I had a girl that says, I want to do this, I want this, I have goals, I have goals. And really, to reach those, if she takes them small increments, are very much attainable. So when we're talking about ideal self, they came up with two words that are extremely important. And if you think about the Venn diagram and the circles and how they overlap, and with all the similarities in the center and the differences on the outside, we talk about incongruent versus congruent. And incongruent, which basically means there's more things that are different in real life than in the ideal life. Where congruent, we're talking about more things in the center, more things that we have similar. So it's very easy to sit there and say, if we have more things as similar, that my ideal self is more like my actual self, then I'm going to say that there's a lot more positives in my life, and I'm going to be more optimistic. Whereas if I myself idea where I want to be, there's more than that than my actual self, then all of a sudden we're going to be thinking less of ourselves, and all of a sudden those things in the middle, the similarities that we have, are going to start moving towards the outside, and then we start to have problems and we fall into different categories. So it's extremely important as teachers that we understand the students' um, self-esteem, whether they're coming into class with the right frame of mind, making sure that we keep them on a good pace, so that we keep them engaged? I mean, we use that word frequently, but do we push it to the limit? So moving on to the next, we talk about social cognitive, and basically it's how we deal socially, and this we learn this from the knowledge gained by the observation of others, the social interactions, our experiences, whether this is at the home from, whether this is at the school. Um, it is all going to be a part of it, whether you like it or not. It is part of the environment we live. We learn from others. And whether it's a good or bad, we'll talk about that moral development in a few seconds, but we want to make sure that our behavior, that we're pushing them in a social environment where they feel a part of the classroom, that we feel that they're part of the group. And as part of my teams in the FFA, um, that they were not outsiders, that we're able to interact as a group, that we are a part, because at the end of the day, the FFA is started part of one chapter. And so we want to make sure that we teach them how to deal with people, how to interact. One thing I'm going to tell you on a personal note, we talk about the um, students with some disorders like Asperger's and autism. If you want to go on the far spectrum of schizophrenia, we're starting to being able to diagnose these individuals. Um, in the past, we just thought they were different or unique. Um, my nephew and my son have this bond that I can only tell you, I don't know what it is, but when they get together, they understand each other. They've had that way since like day one. And what it requires is basically the accepting of one another, and really just being able to work in a community and environment, and really being able to acknowledge that that we are a part of the bigger unit. That when we're starting to talk about social cognitive, is that we're going to learn the behavior and our experiences, how we should act. And I do recycling with students that have autism, my students, and we build it over the year. And instead of just being, hey, it's that class, they start to say, hey, by their names, and hey, friend, hey, and they're part of the group, and they feel a part of it. Because really deep down inside, if you develop a social behavior that is in a positive environment, I keep using this word positive and negative for a reason, is that we are pushed to the limit, that we need to try to not only teach the standards, but to teach them a way of life, whether we're talking about the perception of oneself and how to deal in interactions and being accepting of others. It really does make a difference in an overall grand scheme of things. And which leads to my next one, which is moral development. And it was defined as focusing on the emergence and change of morality from influencing from excuse me from infancy to adulthood. So we're talking about a different age group. And basically, it's the concept of right versus wrong. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who should we believe? Now, this can be influenced by one's culture, one's religion, or one's personal belief, philosophy. There's a lot of things that will lead into this. And really, it's as teachers, we cannot judge. It's a, if it's a cultural thing, we got to be understanding. There's a lot of people in the past, whether you're talking about Sigmund Freud or Baguettes and or Lawrence, they all came up with some all different ideas, and really at the end of the day, Kohlberg is the one I kind of sat with, because even though it was actually described as one of the most vague, it was probably the most um, able to understand. It was the one that I felt if I was to sit down and talk with some students or anything, I could say this and they would have a really clear understanding of what they were talking about. Because there's basically three levels that he talks about: pre-convention, the conventional, and the post-conventional. And when you're talking about the pre-conventional, you're talking about infants to the age of pre-kindergarten. So we're talking about students that haven't made it into the school system. We're talking about the ones that parents are raising them. They're raising them in their houses and the lifestyle, what they want to for them to know. Conventional, we're talking about school age students, the ones that get in the class, that start getting the rules. And then you get into the last one is post-conventional. We're talking about teenagers and to adulthood. We're talking about a wide span here, and really, there's such a big gap in between all these different stages that some people call it too vague. But really, when you're starting to talking about when a newborn, you're infant, you come out, you do the right thing, and all of a sudden you're not punished. All of a sudden you do the wrong thing, something happens, you get yelled at, scolded. We talked about spankings before, and it unfortunately still happens. So an infant will learn: do something right, positive response; do something bad, negative response. So it's all to avoid punishment. When you get to preschool, they start to give rewards, and the student just does the good thing, whether you get candy or extra recess time at school, um, anything like that. Just go on an outing. All these things, we're all talking about just, is there an end result that is going to reward and a benefit? Now, when you get to the conventional stage, you're talking about school age students and conformity, and basically you want to secure approval. You want to be liked by your fellow students. You want to be part of the gang, one of the group, not an outsider. Also, that when you talk about authority, we talk about fixed rules. Guys, there's a reason why we put a rules, procedures, expectations in our classroom. We want to make sure that they follow them, that there is a pecking order that they must follow, and they want to live up to it. And then when you get to post convention, you talk about teens through adulthood. You talk about social, and is it morally versus legally? Now, guys, I'm going to tell you right now that they are not always one and the same. Is it morally correct versus legally correct? There's a lot of people that protest different items. I'm not going to get in the middle of that today because that would be another good hour discussion. But we need to justify it. We need to, that's when cultures come into play, and that's where your beliefs and your political views or anything else come into play. When you get to this point, when you're talking post conventional, you are talking about students that have an understanding, a better appreciation for the world around us. They form their own ideas, and so that really becomes part of it. And when you get into adulthood, you come into morality is based on principles that transcend into natural benefit. So, guys, there is an easy now. Kohlberg has been questioned whether it too vague? Does it provide enough answers? To me, it did. I do believe when I talked about these three items, whether you're talking about moral development, social, and self concept, you're talking about things about how people act, they're influenced. You're talking about the brain in all aspects, how it develops, um, the stage of growth and development. Now, there's a lot of things we can do in this world, but the one thing I hope you learn from all this is number one is that as teachers, we need to make sure that we watch our students. We need to make sure that we're aware of not only the standards that we're trying to teach them, but also more importantly, that we're trying to make them a better person all around. That we need to make sure that we watch the self, how they view themselves, that we know that we're keeping them in the positive frame of mind, because really and ultimately that right there will be able to encourage them to learn more in the classroom, that their mind is set on academics at the particular time, not the self-esteem that they might be in a negative, that they might be thinking poorly of themselves or whether a person likes them or not. And when be able to interact socially, like the social cognitive of it all, we want to make sure that we provide a environment that is worthy, that is providing a good role model, that we are trying to provide um, one that is forthright, that we want to make sure that these kids are learning in the correct way, that they are socially accepting of others, whether you're talking about autism or Asperger's, or whether you're just talking about individuals that might not be the same, or one that struggles just socially, that we try to promote a setting of everyone together. And last but not least, the moral developments. We could sit there and we can go, going back to my land judge, and we could have gone out there the night before and really just practiced the holes and had all the answers, but really at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're doing it correct. Because if we do it correct now, we're modeling to these students. We're showing them the correct way. And then the world we live in, unfortunately, there's a lot of single parents that don't have the time to spend with their kids. And the true role model that they're getting is you as a teacher. So if you spend the time necessary to improve these kids, to make sure that they're in the positive frame of mind, that you make sure that you are training them in the correct way, doing the right things versus the wrong, and making sure you stay the positive feedback. Don't just focus on the negative when you're telling them, hey, you need to change this, this, and this. You're good in so many different ways. Now like that eighth grader that's been skipping class. I just got to make sure that you understand you have a lot going for you and keep the positive rolling instead of the negatives. So again, I appreciate you spending this time with me tonight. I hope you enjoyed and learned a few things, but more than important, as a teacher, I wish you the best of luck and conquering these goals and making sure that you understand that as an educator, you are not just preaching the standards, but you are preaching a way of life and hopefully encouraging these kids to view themselves a little bit more positive and have a better idea of how they want to or who they want to be and how to attain that goal. Good night. Have a good one.